Some of you remember my mother, some of you do not. Those have come later would not remember my mother. But Mother fought a battle with Alzheimer's for quite a while before she passed away at age 84. She passed away back in March. I used to watch Mother. She had some physical problems before she even had Alzheimer's. And I would see her labor of love, how that she would get up when it would be hurting, painful for her, and do for others. She would take care of my father, or she would try to help me. She would drag herself in the kitchen and find the dishes to wash. And I would say, "Mother, do you need some help?" "No, I got this." She said, shared with me that poem you've probably read before about the woman who was thanking God for dirty dishes. And that poem, I can't quote it, but it's about the fact that it's a blessing to have dirty dishes because you've had food and you've had those who've enjoyed eating off those dishes. And if you count your blessings, then that what would seem negative, a chore, becomes a positive. And so she said that she enjoyed that thing that looked like drudgery. And she got to where she couldn't lift the laundry basket. So I noticed all the laundry baskets had these long tails tied to them. And I said, "Mother, what is this?" She said, "Well, that's where I pull it through the house." She was pulling it out to where she could wash the laundry. But I held her hands and I was looking at them, at all the things that she had done with those hands, and was just very thankful for what she was able to do with those hands. You know, it's all the way we look at it, isn't it? The book of James tells us to reframe our struggles. He says, as he opens the book of James, "James, a servant of God, and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad," watch this word, "greetings." Sometimes we may run over a word as seeing it as an introduction, but this word greetings is a special word. It's only found 2 other times in the New Testament. It's found in the book of Acts chapter 15 and Acts chapter 23, and both in the form of a letter. So they would begin the letter, and then they would use this word greetings. What's interesting about this word greetings is Paul didn't use it, and Peter, they would say grace, mercy, and peace to you when they would be signing on to a letter. But James, who may have well written the same letter, the letter that's recorded in Acts 15 to the Gentile churches, he may be the one that used the word there, greetings. What does the word greetings mean? Well, it means to cheer up, best wishes. May you be blessed. May you be happy. May you be fortunate. It's a well-wishing. And this word greetings is a very positive, bright sounding word, so much so that we use this word even today. You recall that when we send greeting cards, we send our well wishes, sometimes at birthdays. A lot of times around Christmas time, people get a Christmas card and it says "Season's Greetings." But it's a cheery way to wish someone well. So he begins this book with a very bright greeting. He says, "I want you to be happy. I want you to be cheerful." Basically, the word greetings here in the Greek means to rejoice. So he wants them to rejoice. Then he brings up a very negative subject, the subject of dealing with various trials or manifold temptations. Now, there are 2 types of these. There are those that come from within, and the inward temptations, our desires that can go to seed, and they form lusts, and lust can lead to sin, and sin, when it is finished, brings forth death, and that leads to separation from God. So there's the inward trials. But here, he's going to talk about that which is on the outside, coming at us, things that we face, problems that we meet in life, outward trials. It could be in the form of persecution. It could simply be problems that we face. But notice what he says. He says, "Greetings, my brethren." We're in this together because we are brothers and we are sisters in Christ. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials or manifold temptations. The word various is like the word variegated. You've seen plants that have variegated leaves. It may be a leaf that's not solid green, but it has some designs that are in other colors. You could have light green, dark green, but they call them variegated. Well, this is the word various or manifold. In other words, trials of all kinds. And he says, well, who wants problems of all kinds? Think about all of this. I heard a little boy one time, he told his mother he was looking down and frustrated, and she said, what's wrong? And he said, I got problems. He recognized at his young age that he had a lot of problems. He didn't know how to say it, but he knew that he had some things that were difficult. Well, what about it when we face or fall into various trials? We talked to a young lady today, and it was her first day back where she was able to get out. And she was a young lady, I say, because she's in her early 20s, but her neck is real stiff. And we said, what's the matter? Because she's always been a picture of health. And she said, you didn't hear? July the 4th, she was involved in a horrific car accident. She was driving Highway 53, and a man came barreling out of a parking lot about 30 miles an hour and hit her. And it fractured her neck. It broke her ribs. Lungs were collapsed, and she was taken to ICU for 2 days. And they had to revive her heart because it stopped. And here she is at a young age and just fell into this. And now they're going to have to do further surgery. And she was in the hospital multiple days and been out of work since July the 4th. And now just trying to get back on her feet. She said, it just hit me out of the blue, literally. Or perhaps you heard, I didn't hear this until I interviewed with this company, but they've got cameras in those trucks we're going to be driving. And there was one of the people in a truck that he was minding his business and doing everything right, but his camera caught something that was not right. And there was a young boy, this is the second day of school, and over on Bailey Cove, and 13 years old on his bicycle, and a car came through and hit him and killed him. But the truck caught everything on camera, and so they could see what happened. But that little boy didn't know what was going to happen to him, and then the people that hit him certainly didn't do it on purpose. And then the fellow that was at work, he's had to take several days off just to get acclimated to the fact that happened. He saw it, and it's affected him. But that's the way trials hit. We fall into them. So notice he uses the word when. My brethren, and we'll just go by the word joy there for a moment. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Various trials happen to all of us. It seems that some people get singled out sometimes to be a modern day Job, as it were. And I know that sometimes trials come in clusters. It seems that when one thing happens, you can find that other things seem to happen. I remember when my mother did pass in March, she passed away, and then about 3 or 4 days later, my cousin, 2 years older than me, passed away. And we didn't expect him to pass away. He was not old enough, at least I thought. But suddenly he was no longer with us. And then several other things happened. And you think, well, it's clustering. Why me? Well, why not me? And sometimes we have to ask that question. And we may not always get an answer, but we can know that this is something common to all of us. My brethren, when you fall into various trials. Now, what's the attitude? Count it all joy. Now, remember, he's already used the word greetings. Cheer up, rejoice. I want what's best for you. And I'm going to tell you something. You are going to meet with various trials. They're coming. But you count it as a Christian all joy. Let me hold your attention at this text, but I want to mention a text just a few pages over. And this is 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 1. Listen to this. Therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind. Have the mind of Christ when it comes to facing suffering. Now, how did Jesus face the cross? Was he excited and joyful about the cross? Well, no. I mean, you think about in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but thine be done. And he was sweating profusely. And it was as if great drops of blood were dripping from him. And it was a scene of great agony. And yet there was joy involved. How do I know that? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. It said, who for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross and despised the shame. Joy related to the crucifixion? Yes. He could see the big picture. The joy set before him was knowing that even if they put him to death, that his Father had the power to raise him from the dead. There is a sense in which the Father raised him, the Spirit raised him, and he raised himself. Because he said, you tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again. He was speaking of the temple of his body. But we know from Romans 1 verse 4 that God declared him to be his Son by raising him from the dead. And it was the Spirit who had that quickening power. In other words, the entire Godhead was in concert working with power to bring him back from the dead. And he was the first fruits of them who slept. And so we can know from his resurrection that we can be resurrected. He's the first fruits, and then we follow. And Jesus himself said, marvel not at this, for the hour cometh when all who are in the graves shall hear his voice and come forth. They that have done good to the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. So all are going to be raised. But 1 Corinthians chapter 15 tells the Christian that our hope and our faith is based on the resurrection of Christ. And because he was raised from the dead as the first fruits, we have the hope of being raised from death. And so there is a reason to rejoice. Who for the joy set before him endured the cross. He could see resurrection. He could see the purpose of his death, that he was laying down his life for our life. So we find in 2 Corinthians 5:21 that he by the grace of God, that's Hebrews 2:9, he by the grace of God tasted death for every man. And then 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. And we know that God demonstrates his own love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And in due season, Jesus Christ died for the ungodly. So you find that in Romans 5:8, Romans 5:6. So Jesus died for us, so to save us from sin. And this is the joy that he could see. And when he rose from the dead, conquering death, he went to sit down by the right hand of the throne of God, Hebrews 12:2. And what is significant about that? Well, he is a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. And we find the high priests in the Old Testament descended from Aaron. They were a different order. And they were standing, ministering. And yet Jesus, when he offered himself once for all time, he could sit down, no longer having to offer himself repeatedly. You see, the Old Testament priest would stand ministering, first offering for their own sins, then for the sins of the people, and they would have to repeat those sacrifices every day, day after day. And they stood ministering. In fact, when they could no longer serve because of death, then someone else would take their place and continue serving and sacrificing. But not our high priest. Our high priest could offer himself without blemish to God and could sit down because his sacrificial offering is over. No longer needing to die on the cross for our sins. He already accomplished that. His blood made available. And so now he sits as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So there is joy. And when we look to him, the author and finisher of our faith, and how he suffered, we can arm ourselves likewise with the same mind. 1 Peter 4 verse 1. So how did he face suffering? Just like James says, he counted it joy. Now, we don't enjoy suffering. I don't think my mother really enjoyed the chore of washing dishes, but she could see that there was a reason to do it, and she enjoyed the reason that she could feed her family, and that her family was fed, and that those dishes represented that to her, and that she had clothes to wash. There are some people that don't have enough clothing, and yet she had clothing, and she could wash those for her boys. And it was a chore, but it was, love does things, even when it involves suffering, because of the joy. And we can count it joy when we fall into various trials, knowing this, as we said this morning, that there is a fruit of going through suffering, and that it produces perseverance or patience. Now, this theme is carried forward in this book. If you go down to verse 12 of James 1, he says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord hath promised to them who love him." It's interesting that the word blessed, like the word greetings, is about a very positive way to think. Let me take you back to the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are you, and men shall revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. On and on, Jesus uses the word blessed. The word blessed, if you take it and look at it in the original, it means someone who has been blessed so much that they are a fortunate one. They are someone that has been blessed by God in the past, and he's continuing to bless them. Drive by a mansion sometime, and if the mansion has some beautiful recent model cars, and maybe they've got a boat out there and their yard is manicured, you might be tempted to say, wow, they have really been blessed. Well, yes, physically they may have been blessed, but if we look in the mirror and we see someone who can still walk, we can still talk, we can still do things, well, we could say the same thing. I have been blessed. We count our blessings, and we know that we have been blessed. And when you count your blessings, you're really getting into this word that Jesus used repeatedly. Oh, the happiness of. Oh, the blessed state of. In the book of Revelation, we learn that those who die in the Lord are blessed. And so that's a good thought, isn't it? That they are with the Lord and they are blessed. But what is this man blessed with in verse 12? Blessed is the man who endures. I know that there have been many sports figures who've been looked up to because of their accomplishments. One time, Kobe Bryant, who broke a lot of the records in the NBA, was asked about a loss that they had had. And they said, how can you continue on with this loss? And he said, I'll tell you how. We endure. In other words, we have to accept the losses with the wins. It's not all about winning. You endure through the difficult times. And so blessed is the man who endures what? Temptation. Temptation is a solicitation toward evil. The devil is the tempter. He says in verse 13, let no man say when he is tempted. See, we are going to go into various trials. when you fall into various trials, verse 2, but we're also going to be tempted. When you are tempted, verse 13. But when we are tempted, let no man say, when he is tempted, I'm tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. God is not in the temptation business. That is the business of the tempter himself, the devil. He is the tempter. What is a tempter? Someone who would solicit someone else to do evil. He is trying to set the bait, the trap, to get someone to commit a sin. God does not do that. Now, God does allow temptation. He allowed Job to be tempted of the devil. Sometimes it even says that God tempts. In the Old Testament, it says that God tempted Abraham. But did he tempt Abraham in this way? No, actually, what that's talking about is he allowed Abraham to go through the test. And through that temptation experience, what God allowed, it says that God did. But it's not saying he did it directly. Neither did he tempt Job directly. Now, Job may have felt God was doing this to him. His wife certainly felt so. She said, why don't you just curse God and die? And he said, well, shall we accept good from the Lord and not evil? Job didn't know what we know by reading the book of Job, that behind the scenes it was the devil, Satan, going up and asking to be able to hurt Job, to take away his family, his wealth, and finally his health. God said, don't kill him, but you're allowed to do that. Does Job serve you for nothing? Well, he's going to be put to the test, and God's going to allow that test. But the dirty work is done by the devil, and he put Job through all of that. People are quick to curse God, aren't they? Hold God responsible for things that God probably has had no hand in whatsoever. People will say, why did God allow this? As if God did it. Well, God may allow things because of just natural law. He set natural law in motion. When people violate natural law, they pay the penalty. If you violate gravity by driving your car over a cliff, it could be by accident, but there's still a penalty to be paid as that car tumbles down the cliff. And we can certainly pray for protection, and God can work through his providence to protect us. How he does that, I don't know, but he does protect us. We can pray for protection. But we do know this, that when God allows the devil to do his work, it's the devil responsible for the evil. And so we should never blame God, verse 13, when we're tempted. But when we endure temptation, we can be blessed. Because when we have passed the test, verse 12, ultimately we will receive the greatest thing, the crown of life, which the Lord gives to those who love him. Revelation 2:10, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life. Going to heaven and being with the Lord is to wear the victor's crown. And that is being faithful to him. He gives this. And so there's all the reason and all the more reason to take a positive view, like the woman taking a positive view of dirty dishes. Here we take a positive view of our temptations and our trials, our suffering. Now, to wrap this up, I want to go to the end of chapter 5. Because he says in verse 7, be patient, brethren. We have told that there can be an opportunity in trial and temptation. And if we endure, it will build patience into our character. But where does the rubber meet the road? Well, it meets it when we are actually being patient. That's why they call them a patient, I guess. They go to the hospital, they've got to be patient with those who are trying to help them. Well, be patient, verse 7, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. Verse 8, you also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. So being patient. How do brethren meet with this idea of being patient? Verse 10, my brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. So take the prophets. They went through a lot. Go back and read Hebrews chapter 11. Some of them were sawn asunder. Some of them were persecuted to the point they were living in caves. The world was not worthy of them because the world was wicked and they were trying to live for the Lord and they were being persecuted. I take Noah, for instance. He was a man in a wicked world that the thought of man was only evil continually, and yet Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was a righteous man. He was a man of God in a wicked world. And so we can look to the example of those who went before us in Scripture, and we can see them as an example of suffering and of patience. Jesus being the greatest example. And then look at some of these prophets. Go over to verse 17. Elijah was a man. He was a prophet. He was one of the greatest prophets. John the Baptist was compared to Elijah. Even Jesus was compared to Elijah. He said, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And so they said, well, some say that you are Isaiah. Some say that you are Elijah. Some say that you are John the Baptist or one of the prophets. He said, who do you say that I am? And they said, Peter said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter had that right. But he was like Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. He was like Elijah, a very powerful preacher. He was like some of these others, like Isaiah. But who was Jesus? He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And yet he had joy. And so did Elijah. Remember, Elijah was a great prophet. But also remember, verse 17, that Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. He was a man. And he prayed earnestly that it might not rain. And it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again. And the heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. Imagine commanding a drought 3.5 years and praying again, and the drought goes away. What a powerful man Elijah was. No, Elijah was a man subject to a like nature like us. And yet, a person like Elijah could pray, and the power was in the answer of the prayer. God held that rain for 3.5 years, and then when he prayed again, he gave the rain from heaven, and the earth produced its fruit. Go back and read that incident in 1 Kings 17 and 18, and you'll find out why that took place at that time. But the point is this, verse 16, the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. Elijah ran for his life from Jezebel when she threatened him. He ran a long way too. And to the point he was so exhausted he wanted to die. And yet God fed him, gave him something to drink, and then let him rest. And then he got a better perspective. He reminded Elijah, I've got thousands who have not bowed the knee to Baal. You're not alone. You've got others serving the Lord. Maybe you're not aware of them, but there are others serving the Lord besides you, Elijah. So this man could be weak in the faith, but he could still pray, and God could powerfully answer that prayer. He was a man very bold in faith. He was the one that won the contest over the prophets of Baal, 450 of them. Well, God won the contest over the idol god. And yet Elijah was one who was so bold in that contest. So he had his highs, he had his lows, and so do we. What was he able to do? He was able to pray. And we can pray. And if good things can come to a man who was able to pray, when we're prayerful, like he was, we can expect good things. So what is the key? The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man. A man cannot go to God with soiled hands and soiled heart. In chapter 4, he tells us that we can draw near to God, and he will draw near to us. He says in verse 7, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. So how does a man draw near to God? Here's the way it happens. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Now watch this. Human beings cannot come before God with a sinful life and sinful heart and start demanding things from God. You know, those who do not know God, they will often talk to God like that. They may say something as flippant as, well, I got to go talk to the man upstairs. Well, God's not a man upstairs. He's God of the universe, and he should be revered. And reverend is his name, and he is holy. And we should approach God with fear and trembling. Humility. The humble man will be lifted up, not the proud man. So when we draw near to God, we can be sure he will draw near to us. But first, if our hands are dirty, cleanse them. If your heart is soiled, purify your heart, you double-minded. You can't have a filthy mind and a clean mind and it be appropriate. You have to have a single mind. And so, purify your hearts, you double-minded. In other words, approach prayer like Elijah did. He was a righteous man. And he prayed earnestly, fervently. He didn't just say, God, I need your help. No, you've seen a fervent heat. It's not just warm. It burns it's white hot. It's fervent. And so we need fervency in our prayer and earnestness in our prayer and coming to God, drawing near to him with clean hands and pure heart. I don't think it's literally talking about washing our hands with soap. If it needs that, that's one thing. But what are we doing with our hands? Let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor with his hands, that he may have wherewith to give to him who has need. Or Jesus said, if your right hand offends you, cut it off, cast it from you. So don't do bad things with your hands. Cleanse your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Verse 6, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. So that's what he did with Elijah. And that's what he will do with us. And of course, the great example of Job. We back up in this same chapter when he says, take those that have gone before us as an example of suffering and patience. Look at verse 11. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. There's that word again, blessed. Do you know the King James Version here translates the word blessed, happy. We count them happy which endure. Are you happy about enduring? Well, you know, if you've got a toothache and you go to the dentist and the dentist says, well, I've got something for you. Get in the chair here. I'm going to put a shot in your gum and your cheek and try to numb it there for you. And now I've got a drill. That scared me to death as a child. The sound of that drill, I thought, he's fixing to hurt me. Well, you endure that. And then I found they got a lot better medicines now. And maybe the dentist I see now is a lot better than I remember as a child. But when you get down to it, you endure that experience because on the other side, there's the hope, no more tooth pain. And that's the way it is with all trials. We should be, we count them happy who endure, as he says in verse 11. And then he says, you've heard of the perseverance or patience of Job. And we have. You go back and read the book of Job, and you see a man who lost everything except his life. And yet, he didn't give up his faith. He was tempted to, even by his own wife. His friends criticized him. Job, you must be a sinful man. You must be worse than all the rest because look what's happened to you. But Job didn't buy into that. He knew better. He trusted the Lord because he loved the Lord. and he was ready to endure come what may. He was not going to let those trials rob him of his faith. So we've heard of the patience of Job. And what did we see at the end of the book of Job? Well, look at the last part of verse 11. You've seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. Job got more children. He got more riches. He got his health back. Now, it didn't undo the scars of the past, but he had to leave that in the past in the safekeeping with God. But God was able to bless him because he passed the test. And Job, no doubt, was a better man for having kept his faith when many would have abandoned their faith. So since it is the case that trouble and trials are coming to all of us, what kind of attitude are we going to have? The attitude of a quitter like Judas, who took matters in his own hands and quit the Lord and quit life? Or would we be like Peter, who went out and wept bitterly over what he did and repented himself and came back? We need to be like Peter. We need to be like Job. We need to be like Elijah. And we need to be, most of all, like Jesus. There's reason to rejoice. Paul, writing to the Philippians, he was in prison. And yet he said, rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. He had reasons to rejoice. He didn't let prison rob him of his pen. He wrote letters, 4 prison epistles we call them. He didn't let prison rob him of his pulpit because he preached to those that were around him. And he certainly didn't let prison rob him of his perseverance because he had faith that was unwavering. He was not a double-minded man, and we are warned about that. Let us have a single focus on the Lord. I've told this before, but I heard the story of a woman who was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, and they said, how, after all you've been through, do you keep your faith? And she said, why give up on the Lord now? He's at the end of the path. Why would I abandon him now? She was going to the Lord. And that's what Paul said. To depart and be with the Lord is far better. So why quit? Even if the journey is strewn with difficulty, we need to persevere. Behold, we count them happy which endure. We're going to sing the song of invitation. Jesus says, bring me your burdens. Come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I'm meek and lowly in heart. Ye shall find rest unto your souls. Bring your burden of sin. He will take you if you would repent of sin. If you would be baptized for remission of sin, He'll add you to His church. He will be your Lord, your King. He'll be your Savior. He'll give you purpose and meaning in the midst of trials. We're going to sing to encourage you if you need to come.